Hello, welcome to today's video. This is going to cover the debt apocalypse, and this is going to be on the sovereign debt situation. If you just came across this video, this is the third part. I recommend you watch these videos first. So what we discussed was fiat money was the ability for these central entities, the central banks, to control the money supply and monetary policy. The genius of this is that you don't use the money creation to fund anything directly, but rather governments can take debt and then allow the central bank to fund the debt later on. This is delaying the debasement and the consequences of this. So how does this work? The government takes on debt. They've got an interest rate and durations on the bonds. What they pay, interest is dependent on the bond market. Bond prices are related to the yield, which is the interest rate they're paying. And you have the usual supply and demand dynamics for this market. So let's take the situation when debt's expanding by the government just issuing more bonds and taking on more debt. Supply and demand forces is going to say that when you're increasing supply of bonds, you're going to be pushing down prices. When you push down bond prices, you increase bond yields. Increasing bond yields is accelerating the interest and the debt situation. So this brings us to the purpose of fiat. As mentioned, this allows central banks to use their ability to create money to buy bonds and cool down this market. Doing so, they can push interest rates lower, and they're going to fuel and slow down this debt expansion. Without this intervention, the bond market would just collapse. So we can look at the expansion of the debt, but this has only been possible through the fueling of the central bank, and what this is the Federal Reserve's balance sheet. This represents the value of the assets that they own, and they acquire these through printing money digitally. And the majority of this is the sovereign bonds. The other major component is something called mortgage-backed securities. That's a topic for another video. So what's the problem with the debt expansion? Well, it's not a problem, it's really a catastrophic problem, because these are the assets of the entire economy. Everything from pension funds, investment funds, banks, corporate assets, insurance funds. The reason these are held like this by everyone is because they're paying a small interest rate that they can rely on, and in the short term they're much more useful and not as risky as investing in stocks. So it becomes a really important part, like blood. It's the analogy is that these bonds are the blood of the economy. So let's look at some numbers on this. The US $35 trillion debt, deficit 1.5, UK 2.7 trillion, deficit around 100 billion. So what do you call a scheme that promises to pay investors but can only do so by taking more debt because they do not have the income to pay the investors? So there's 5 possible paths where this can go from here. Path A is just a continuation of expanding debt. Path B is to default in the debt, just cut it off, cancel it. Path C is you create money to pay off the debt. Path D is you eliminate the deficit, use a surplus, and you use that to pay off the debt. And then path E is just moving sideways with this, where there's no change in the total debt. So what's happened for the entire history of fiat? Well, it's just been a continual expansion of the debt. So why would that be? Because in the short term, it's the path of least resistance. It's the easiest option for every administration and government. And we're going to look at in more detail why that's the case. So let's say you want to do option B, default in the debt. The problem is, how much of the debt are you going to default on and to who? Because there's different owners of your bonds. This is an instant catastrophic issue to the population who own the bonds, and it's also going to hurt their credit rating. It's just instantly politically chaotic. So from a political perspective, there's no incentive to do this. Option C, paying off the debt with new money. This is extremely inflationary. And yet again, it's a question of how much debt are you willing to pay. So look at some examples. If you want to pay half of the US debt down, that's going to require an 83% debasement of the dollar. Paying half of the UK debt is about a 45% debasement. So again, politically, why would you do this? This is just more chaos. Option D. This is the most responsible path. However, like the rest of them, politically, tax increases and budget cuts not politically favourable. It's more political chaos. Again, no short-term incentive, and thus why you do not see this happen. Option E, moving sideways. You could do this, although government deficits are so out of control. And we can talk in another video about why that is when we start thinking about deficits in terms of corruption. But we don't see this happening, and we don't see the pain that this is going to cause, because again, this will require tax increases and budget cuts, and so again, no short-term incentive, and we don't see this happening. So what's probable? Path of least resistance. So path A. This is exactly what we have been seeing. Just numb the problem, exacerbate the problem, kick the can down the road, because there's no incentive for anyone in power today to cause more chaos and pain for themselves. However, this is going to maximise the long-term damage. So if we establish that path A is where we're going tomorrow and next year and the year after, 5 years, 10 years, so what does this look like? We expand the debt, we grow the debt. Eventually you're going to need central bank to fuel that, more debasement of the currency, but that doesn't pay off the debt, so the debt still grows with interest. And then it's a spiral, you're back to square one. You've got more debt, more interest, and then you need the central bank involved again, and it continues, debasing the currency. So you can't continue with this indefinitely, because eventually you're accelerating the debt and accelerating the debasement of the currency, and you end up destroying both. So then you're saying eventually that needs to come to an end. Eventually they need to put the brakes on the debt, which then leads you to say, well, eventually one of the other options is required. There's an additional risk to debt acceleration, which is the chance of massive divestment from bonds. This leads to a drop in bond prices, thus increasing in interest rates, and that increased interest rate expands and accelerates debt. However, I'm going to cover this issue in another video. So what's the consequences of this? The first is the primary. If you're invested in fiat money, fiat bonds, through either debasement, default, or hyperinflation, you have an issue. Consequence B is secondary. Even if you don't own any fiat, the fiat isn't so ubiquitous in these economies that it's going to have an impact on economic activity and destroy economies. Any form of debasement, default, is a threat to the asset holders of fiat bonds and cash. You do not want all of these paths, all these options that are presented that are inevitable. All of them are dreadful. And so if you're not involved, as I said, let's suppose you have no fiat assets, you have no direct losses. As I said, the extent of fiat means that with the other side of the economy being melted, it's just going to break down. It's just like your car. If you take the fuel out You might not have a direct investment in the fuel. Doesn't keep you alive, your own body, but the car's going to break down. The car's not going to drive. And this is because once you melt out fiat, the problem is people aren't using other forms of money. Just like how your car runs on one fuel, you don't have backup sources. Again, it's like the blood. Drain the blood out of the system, what happens? Well, the heart, the brain, the liver, they're all fine, but then they stop working because they need the blood, they need the money. So you can think of the economy as, on one hand, you have the real economy, the people, the labour, the energy, the resources, and all of that works because of the money. The money allows every part of the economy to move. So if you have this situation of debt expansion and it's going to cause hyperinflation of the currency and destroy the bonds, then if you don't have alternatives, what are you doing? How does this work? How does the economy then work? Simply doesn't. Everything breaks down. You can't use money to pay for something because you don't have the value of the money. You can't work for something for money because no one's paying you. So it all just breaks down. It leaves you with nothing. It leaves the economy empty, unable to do anything. Just like the body can't do anything without blood. Even though the heart and the liver, all the organs are fine, totally healthy. Take the blood out, it's dead. So conclusion. Sovereign debt is the main financial asset of the global economy. It's the largest market in the world. It's mathematically unstable. However, the political incentives are aligned to numb the problem, expand it, kick it down the road. So how is it possible to have an optimistic view of fiat assets when the entire history is this expansion of the problem? Thanks for watching.